Welcome to this video. This is a James School of Genesis production. The purpose of this video is to introduce the school, the concept of the school, and its main genesis. And I have to explain a few things before one can understand what I mean by genesis as opposed to thesis, and what I mean by somethingness as opposed to nothingness, so that one can understand why it is that this right here, this list of words, is not a theory, but a genesis. So first, I have to explain the concept. The school of James, James comes from my middle name. School comes from creation. It comes from Genesis itself. It is the ability to create, to learn. Learning is creation. If that sounds wild, another way of putting it is that school is above abstract thought. The practice of school, the work that you produce while learning, is creation. Now, the reason why I explained, now we'll get into school a little bit more. My goal is to open up a school of thought. Much like many philosophers have, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and almost in that order, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Many philosophers over time have developed their own schools of thought. In this case, the James School of Genesis is not philosophy, but rather above the abstract. Philosophy you can certainly state that philosophy is abstract and not just thinking, everything abstract. That's a difference of definition. Genesis, as an understanding, is simply beginning, Bereshit in Hebrew, beginning, or creation. So you kind of put beginning and creation together, and what you get, and the reason why it's beginning, and here's the real understanding behind it, is because creation is much like this position above the abstract, and you can imagine the abstract as something that is already quite difficult to do. It's not something you easily spend your faculties of existence on. By faculties of existence, I'm referring to something like senses and rationality combined. And so it's not just thinking, which is the higher processes, which I will point out later, which is kind of up here, and then empiricism, which is these senses, what you know as senses down here. This is kind of a combination of rationality and empiricism. Now, abstract thought, as I was mentioning, is quite difficult to do. It's quite difficult you don't spend a lot of your time abstracting. Now, you could. It's not as though you couldn't. It's just that when living life, of course, in the day-to-day life, as it goes in communication with others and living with others as we do, we don't spend as much time being abstract as we do perhaps being social. Okay, so the difference here is that what I'm trying to say is creation or learning, Genesis, being slightly above what is abstract, is even far less of the time you will spend in your life than, for example, being abstract, where you will spend a little more time in it. Hierarchically, what I'm saying goes down from here. Being physical is going to be the majority of your time. And being physical is for example, sports. It's working out. It's utilizing all the parts of your being into a physical manner through which you actualize. So creation or learning, in this case, is this unknown paradigm, this unknown space above the abstract where you go in your faculties, in your abilities to process something, not just thinking, but just processing something. Learning is going to be above the abstract. Okay, so now that I've explained why learning and creation is so important, and that what that has to do with philosophers is that this is not philosophy, this is Genesis. In fact, this is Genesology, which is really like saying creationology, ology for knowledge, or rather understanding, and Genesis, or Genes, 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 for creation or learning. So this is the practice of learningology, learning knowledge. Now, knowledge itself is reducible to logic. So I'm in a way foundationally combining creation and logic. Should that be the highest path? Well, again, to reduce knowledge to logic is a process by which you're trying to figure out what something is foundationally. Foundationalism is this. This is foundationalism. Begins with, there's 22 of these. These are the faculties of your foundation of your existence. The James School of Genesis will be Genesology. Will be focused on creation and logic. The reason why we don't focus on perhaps impression, which is memory, or history as we know it. History isn't the only impression, of course, but it's an example. Psyche, which is self, spirit, soul. Abstract, which is thinking. Okay? The reason why we don't combine these three to make a craft or a paradigm, Genesology, is because the process of knowing is logic itself. So for me to call it something, to have a craft, all crafts would come out of logic then, because it's the craft or your work, your line of work is reducible to logic. Logic is slightly less than memorization. It's your wisdom. It's your experience of learning, what you have habituated. Okay, so you're not just, the ology stands for the practice of creation. Now, you could also redefine ology, which I do, but I just wanted to explain how that would sit in the current standing of the world and how we understand ology and Genesis and how that combines to make Genesology. Ology to me, which I slightly just alluded to, would be craft or work. And craft or work to me is learning, is creation, is done in school. It's not a division of the two in opposition like we have in our world, where everything is oppositioned, or split, or divided, or monotheistic. And that by monotheistic, I mean by one single entity being the all-pervading, all-knowing thing. In that case, what I'm moreover mean is that atoms are not the sole individual thing that create all of this. That's what I meant by monotheism. It's just a bit of a thwart on the word monotheism to help explain what I mean by ology, Genesis, by learning, by creation, by the school, James School of Genesis, and what that really is, what that means. So, thesis is the opposite of Genesis. I just finished explaining it, so I'll explain it again. Thesis is this monotheistic thing. It's the one theory. What is your theory? What is your one thing that defines all other things? What is your theory? Now, typically you could understand a combination interdisciplinary of theories. That is the beginning process of going towards Genesis. It's as though the world has educated itself to be in opposition. My school that I will develop is not education. It is academics. Education is the repetition and regurgitation of theories, solely based on a single theory, which in this world is based off physics. Physics is the paradigm of physicality. That happens to be the lowest. And by lowest, I mean in a value-based order of what is the most important for your existence. The least important for your existence is being physical. The reason why is because to be just physical, you would have no process ability. You would have no ability. If you were just physical, you would have no ability to think. You would have no mind. Forget the soul. Forget the spirit. That's like higher, even higher level, categorical positions where it's beyond just thinking. The mind itself here is somewhere quite high, actually, I would say around logic or system or structure, perhaps. And I'll get into these in a second. But what I'm trying to explain is the difference between theses and Genesis. Theses theory is solely and wholly delusional. Physics and its theory of atoms is 100% delusional. Telepathic manipulation, grandeurs, Einsteinian grandeurs, as I call them. Einstein's brain. The concept of reality by which we are just atoms, a collection of atoms, and through which the atoms create all other things that can be faculties of the existence, by which atoms decompose and die, and so will we, is the theory that we are nothing. Now, let's go through this quickly. This is, now that I've explained the difference between Genesis and I've explained thesis. Genesis, of course, I'll provide the difference between somethingness and nothingness, then provide my explanation of Genesis. So the reason why I'm doing that is because to explain theses, we need to understand the difference between somethingness and nothingness. Something, if you can imagine what something is, it doesn't have to be very much, so long as it satisfies being. For something to be something, it must satisfy being. Meaning, if atoms exist, the invisible ghost of death, as I call it, If atoms exist and atoms do create everything, they maintain the position of something. Because we can use technology and tests and filters and fire particles through filters and know that particles exist because, well, we just know. Okay, that's where an atom comes into the realm of being something. As it becomes something and is something, it at no point can become nothing. Because the theory that nothing becomes something becomes nothing, or nothing becomes something, becomes nullified, or nothing, or something rather, becomes nothing, becomes nullified, or something becomes nothing. Any order of those three combined, nullification, nothingness, and somethingness. Nullification and nothingness are quite similar, except nullification usually would actually come between nothingness and somethingness. It's the process through which somethingness goes through in the process to become nothing. Now, so long as we understand, for something to be, I, the responsible being, the existing individual, must, at 100% value, meaning the whole value to satisfy somethingness, there must be complete certainty that something is something because it exists. And the only way in which I, the responsible individual, can know that, meaning Genesis, is because I can see it, I can taste it, I can shape it, I can move it. I, with my faculties, can perceive it 100% wholly. At no point is there proof that, and this is going to sound wild, and what this has to do with my school is also not going to make sense, but will make sense with further explanation, is that atoms do not exist because they claim to be nothing. And that out of that nothingness, something is created for a temporary period by which it goes through nullification and then on to nothingness again. The possibility of that is so impossible because nothingness, by definition, is nothing. As soon as you actualize in your own process the ability to understand that you actually know without doubt, with complete your own empowerment and certainty, that nothingness is and completely and wholly nothing. If you understand that, you will understand that to understand, you must have some ability to do so. There is a somethingness quality, a somethingness qualification by which you go through in your own faculties and your own abilities as you are as an existing being in your foundation of existence. You utilize some part of that to understand something. But at the same time, you can, through imagination, through the creative ability, through creation itself, create non-realities. And using your faculties actually help, in a way, create an environment in which you will live, where there will be complete doubt, lack of certainty, death, amnesia, destruction, no understanding, nothingness. It will seem as though your reality, which you have created, which is the opposite of the true reality, is real because you utilize your faculties to create that environment. We already know telepathically, meaning through the psyche, through the mind, if you'd like, we can move a hand on a screen that touches a ball telepathically. Now, what that means is, first of all, we've, through our own intelligence, created a computer. Artificial intelligence that is self-learning is working through a structure that is learning. That structure is no different than the one that you've programmed it to do. So that computer is then just being responsible. It is actually someone's personal intelligence duplicated into a computer to then do what they do. So there is no actual external intelligence other than the individual human being intelligence. For that understanding to be realized, you need to realize that nothingness is impossible. That the reality of nothingness can be created through somethingness, but that the reality of somethingness and its actual factual bases can never come out of nothingness, because the nature of nothingness is nothingness. The nature of somethingness is somethingness, therefore, only out of something can come something. And the idea or the concept of nothingness can be thought through by just simply oppositioning somethingness to nothingness. Hell, or Sheol, is the opposite of heaven. All that satisfies hell and the reality of hell is nothingness, doubt, theory, thesis, things like that. All that satisfies heaven is Genesis, certainty, creation, existence, peace, not war, etc. It is the reverse of the opposition. So you have a reverse and you have an opposition, and that's all you have. Any matter of oppositioning, whether you simply completely opposition or partly opposition, any form of that is opposition. There's a bit of a gradient, a nullification process I explained. The nullification is in between somethingness and nothingness. The James School of Genesis will be, and will certainly come to light eventually, and will teach, or pedagogue I should say, not teach, will pedagogue each individual into the understanding that is Genesis as opposed to thesis. It is academics, not education. The academics will give you, the citizen, the individual, complete and whole power over your existence by providing the information that is lacking from the world in which we live in, that we have chosen to live in, that we have chosen to opposition ourselves. We will come back from the darkness into light, and in this case, light also does not exist, because light is either a color or is not a color, and that's a different story. Now I will get into the Genesis. In our Genesis, the only way in which you will be able to understand this is to understand that all you need to do is think in and of itself, which means actual thinking. Actual learning, actual thinking will teach you everything you need to know. When I began this process, I began with colors. And I thought, well, foundationally, however many colors I see, in and of themselves, without light or darkness, because hue or light and darkness is this invisible nothingness. Invisibility clearly qualifies as nothingness. Hue is actually just this nullification. In fact, it's this in-between period, whereas actual invisibility is nothingness. So now we're getting into spectrum and color, and specifically genesis of spectrum, as opposed to the theory of color or the concept of color. We'll call it genesis, nemesis, thesis. Nemesis for death, for destruction, not your nemesis as in death and destruction. The process towards thesis. The steps. This theory of color would reduce it to 3 colors. That we combine these 3 colors and somehow black and white are this imaginary tint tone shade, black, white, gray. This is the most ridiculous, outlandish, delusional thinking possible. That 3 colors, red, green, blue, combine to make all other colors, and that black, white, and gray are just this thing we see just like color in every way that's not color. Oh, and of course, all color you see is just atoms reflecting through prism, and that's just like this pyramid shape for conceptual reasons, of course. And light is invisible, so therefore all that you see is invisible. It's nothingness. And you know you're seeing something. There's no way in which you can actually say to yourself, you look out in the world and see a color and say, well, white or black is somehow something different than other colors. So the stepping stone backwards here, working backwards instead of forwards towards Genesis, working from thesis to Genesis, we step into nemesis. Nemesis is where we begin to see, well, that actually black and white are colors too. And you begin to ask yourself, how many colors are there? So you write it down. That's when you will see dark blue and light blue and think, well, those are different colors. For a while, and then you get out of the hue, the light and dark, and you walk into the actual spectrum of sight and see that there is exactly 22, or actually Venn, not 11, Venn. There are Venn number of colors. The colors are as follows: white, red, orange, brown, yellow, green, cayenne, blue, violet, black, clear, pink, peach, lava, turquoise, indigo, amethyst, gold, citrine, gray, magenta, and silver. Each of these colors or spectrums are in and of themselves, and not one of them look alike. Not one of them, or rather, there's likeness, but there's not one of them can be identified as the same spectrum, the same color. Like this is clearly black, white, with a little bit of gold, and we have silver, which is not gray. You'll notice there's a real difference between silver and gray. Now, Genesis, nemesis, thesis has just been explained through spectrum. When I realized how many there ought to be, and when I realized how perfect the formula was for number, that both coincided, I realized that there was a foundation, there was an imprint, there was an exact formula for how this works, and there will be an exact number of 22 categories or positions in a foundation on which we rest and which we exist. And that's when I had to only develop what was in that foundation. To develop what was in that foundation, I simply thought through my own faculties, thought in and of itself. And that is as follows: physicality, body, movement, symbol, taste, smell, sound, spectrum, energy, chemicals, metals, stones, principles, elements, formula, structure, system, logic, impression, psyche, abstract, and creation. Now, in this video, at the bottom in the comments, I will list this very list of colors, numbers, and positions in the foundation. I will have that there for you as soon as the video is up. The James School of Genesis will teach Genesology, which is learning and no longer logic. As I explained, we're getting away from ology and logic and knowledge being connected, but ology really meaning craft. So the craft of learning will be taught as the most important, but will not be the sole single monotheistic thing that is the theory by which all other things come through, like atoms in physics. It is simply because we require a focus when learning. And to learn, what you will do in my school is you will learn each of these individual categories, what comes out of it. For example, spectrum, you have all these colors, exactly 22. You have formula or number, and you have Venn, net, in, high, ves, ixis, vif, rof, ret, twee. I mean, you go on twee, neo, mono, and then 98765432110, as you're familiar with. This is a formula, not number. The reasoning is that from 0 to 9, or rather 0 to 00, because if you notice when you count and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you suddenly jump to 10, you're missing 0 and the value of 0 where it comes before a number to increase the number. When you realize that, you realize that 0 has to come after 9, and that 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5, 0, 6, 0, 7, as you know it. I did call them others something else, but I'm just showing you an example. 0, 7, 0, 8, 0, 9. Then we come to the 1 and 0. The 1 would come before the number, and then a 0 to reset it back. 10 and 11. And the reason why it stops at 11, it's a formula, because you actually get from 0 to mono 11 numbers, and from 0, 1 to 11, 11 numbers, which is a perfect 11. 11, 11, two sets of 11. You end at 11. That is a formula. Numbers should be based on formula, not on just counting. There's way too much to explain on each specific thing, including spectrum and color and number, spectrum and formula. Each of these requires its own video, and I will get on to videos about it. I hope my video has explained Genesis, the school and its goals, and what it does, and how it is different from education, from the one education you are used to and understand, which is delusional and disassociated. I mean no offense. Where this is actually grounded in reality, the actual reality, which is the one that you are in, not the one which you are conceptualizing for yourself through your own faculties. Thank you for watching. My name is Kevin James Savard.